Okay, thanks. Welcome, everybody. I think you all know me, Bob Storer. You may not know our TA, Sachil Solzur. Where are you, Sachil? Here somewhere.
Yes.
Please turn on your videos if you haven't already. Okay, welcome to IBE250 Junior Lab. There's a lot of different ways to describe this course, but the way I like to describe it is we're going to learn various quantitative techniques and models useful in business. Quick summary of the course, there's kind of two main things we do in this course. One is we play the business game. So this is a simulated competitive game environment where teams play against each other, and whoever makes the most money wins, basically. It's pretty complex. Every week you have to make a bunch of decisions. Those decisions affect how much money you make. Second thing we do is we have a lecture every week on some new kind of problem or quantitative technique in business, and there's homework associated with that. So everything in this class is done in groups, right? The homework is done in groups, the game is played in groups, but that's basically the two main components. So if I share my screen, we have the course site here. So the first thing is I've assigned the teams. I really have to log on again. Stupid course site. What am I doing? Oh. Cool. Okay, so we have 12 groups. And these are the group assignments. Now I assign these myself. I have a particular way of going about it. If you thought about it hard, you might figure out. But these are the groups. So here's your group number over here, 1 through 12. Here are your teammates, contact information.
Professor, I don't see anything on the screen. I'm not sure if that's just me.
Okay, shoot. I thought that would work. Let's try this again. Okay, hopefully you can see it now, right?
Yeah, we can see it now.
Yeah, thank you. All right, here's the groups. So there's 12 groups. So there may be a couple drop ads. I just did this yesterday, so they might change a teensy bit. But for the most part, this is your group. So that's posted. And I'm curious, Andrew, Joachim, are you here today or not? Speak up. I guess not. He's the guy that's sick, so hopefully he'll be okay.
Professor Storer, I found out this morning that I wasn't even registered. Like, it didn't go through. I had an error with my IBE classes, so they got me into the course this morning. So I'm not sure if I'm even on that list.
Okay, who's talking? I can't hear you. Oh, Sheena.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we'll just put you in group 4, okay?
Sounds good.
And I'll add you. I'll update the spreadsheet later. I don't know why that happened. So now I've lost course site, of course. Okay, so those are the team assignments. Next is the syllabus and schedule. So I don't want to go through all of this in great detail, but here's the contact information. So now the course is scheduled, as you know, 1:35 to 4:15. So on a typical day, The only days that are not going to be typical are today and the very last day in the last week. But in the typical day, I'll give a lecture that lasts anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. And the rest of that time will be available to you to work as teams on your business decisions for the game and or the homework. Cecile and I will be there to help you with either of those, but mainly with the homework. I mean, if in an ideal world, you would stay, work on the homework problems, get them done, and you would be done with, done with the week by 4:15. Of course, I have no way of stopping you from leaving once I stop talking, once my lecture's over, and you can do that too. But basically, the office hours for this class are the 2 hours right after the lecture, all right? So here's basically how the grading works. So we're gonna play the business game, but we're gonna have 2 rounds. The business game is complicated, and there's lots of ways to mess up, right? So we're gonna play a practice round for 3 periods, all right? And they won't count for nothing. That's the experimental round. It'll count for a little bit, right? But, it's a practice round for you to get used to it. Then after we play 3 rounds of that, then we'll go for the serious round of the business game, and that we'll play 12 rounds of, right? So typically we have 1 round per week, and that's the biggest part of the class. Here's the homework is worth 25%. The last week we'll have final presentations from each group, and that'll be 10%. And then we'll collect some data on this to see if anyone was a slacker, and that will come into it as well. Okay.
Professor, a quick question about the serious round for the business game.
Right.
Is the grade going to necessarily be correlated to our standings? Like, let's say we made moves, they ended up being bad, but we had a reasonable explanation for the moves, but we still end up getting full credit, or is it completely tied to our performance?
It's 100% tied to your performance. In other words, if your team makes the most money, you win. So my grading curve for this class overall for final grades is it's about 25% A's, 25% A minus, 25% B plus, 25% B. You can imagine how that works out. So in order to actually play the game, you first have to be logged into VPN, and then this is the address. It's not set up yet because we still have work to set up. I mean, you could see what it looks like basically, but it's not set up yet for this year. Okay. So the assignment's going to use analytic tools. We're going to do a lot of optimization and some statistics and data analysis. We're going to make heavy use of Excel and in particular Solver. Okay. This talks about the game. But we're going to talk a lot about the game as soon as I'm done going through the syllabus. So basically, this week, my lecture is going to be how the business game works, right? And that's going to take a while, and it's going to be long and boring. I've done this a number of years, and it's long and boring every time, but it's necessary because you have to understand how it works. And what you're going to do is going to turn in some basic information. There's a sheet that I'll show you. Basically, you got to pick a name for your team. You got to pick like a password that will log you into the business game under your team. And then you have to bid on a location. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means as well. So basically, you need to fill a little bit of information into a spreadsheet. It shouldn't take too long for you to figure that out once I stop talking. Okay? Then next week, we're going to talk about optimization and Solver. And then the following week, there'll be an assignment on optimization, and that will be due the following week, right? And also, your decisions have to be input into the game, basically the 2 days before class, right? So today, you can talk about the decisions you're going to make, and they'll be due next Monday at 6 p.m. All right. Sachil is in charge of the game. So if you have issues with the game, you need to talk to Sachil. All right. Then here's the basic topics we're going to cover. Looks like some business stuff. And then the last week, final presentations. Oops. No, come on. So having a little trouble navigating. All right, so just a quick look here. Give me a second. All right, this is the form that's posted on course site. This is what you have to turn in by 5 o'clock today. Email it to Sachil. Geez, we probably should have used a Google form for this, but okay. So basically, you have a team number is the one that's in the sheet I showed you earlier, right? So you know what team number you are. Then you're going to have a team name and a team password. So you don't want other teams to be able to log into your account on the business game, because then they can steal all kinds of valuable information. And then you have to bid on a city. So one of the aspects of the business game is transportation costs. And each team will be assigned to a city. And this just shows the distance between each of the cities. There is some advantage to being centrally located, but in all honesty, there's not a huge advantage. Now, the market sizes of these cities are all considered to be identical. In the real world, we all know that Chicago is a bigger city than Nashville. But in the business game, they're all the same size in terms of the size of their markets, right? But some are further away than others. All right, so you'll be asked to submit a bid on each city. Okay, and based on the bids that are given, we'll assign cities to teams. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But this is a sheet that you need to turn in by 5 o'clock today. Are there any questions so far? Because now I'm about to launch into how the business game works. Like I said, it's going to be long, complicated, and perhaps boring. But if during my discussion, if you have questions, just unmute yourself and ask away.
So for the teams, just to clarify, for our team, it has John Carr. Is that supposed to be Alex, or is that a different student?
I believe, well, no, that's Alex, but it's whatever Banner puts his name out as. That's why it says John, because I believe John is his actual first name or something like that. So that's Alex. All right. Okay, here we go. Introduction to the business game. All right. So teams are competing against each other. The goal is to have the highest valued assets. Each period, you'll submit a bunch of different business decisions through decision forms on the business game. And those decisions are due Mondays at 6 p.m. Once the decisions are all in, Suchil will run a simulation that takes all the input, does a bunch of calculations, and then outputs the results of that period of business activity. So you'll get an output form that'll, how many units you sold, profit you made, all kinds of things like that. And we'll take a look at that, okay? So as I said, it's pretty complex. It was a game that was kind of home built by my former colleague, Joe Hartman. It's not professional quality software. It has its own idiosyncrasies. And so, if you have issues, like I said, contact Suchil about the problems you're having. All right, so we're going to run it for 3 periods. That's the trial game. And that'll be worth a little bit, 10%. But the main purpose of that is for you to understand how the business game works. All right, and then we'll do the real game, and that'll be 12 periods. All right, so the results are cumulative, right? So what matters at the end of the real game is how is the value of your assets at the very end, right? So you get no credit for doing real good in week 1, right? You only get credit for being on top at the end of the game. Okay, we talked about these home bases. You'll have to bid on these home bases. You can bid whatever you want. You start off with $300,000 in cash. I'll give you a couple hints today. One hint is that in the business game, the actual location that you get is not that big a deal. It's not worth spending a lot of money on, say, Chicago, because it's centrally located. One of the reasons for that is you can build plants in other cities if you want to, or warehouses, right? So that's one of the reasons why it's not that big of a deal. And as I said before, the market sizes are all the same. The other thing is, I am the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and Chairman of the, the Federal Securities Commission, which means that I resolve all issues as I see fit, in the case of malfeasance in particular, right? So if you do something I consider to be cheating, I can fine you whatever I want. I will try and be fair, but what I say goes. Okay? So the business game, we're building and selling a particular product. Turns out this game was developed a while ago. The product that we build and sell in this game are CD racks. So CD racks are pieces of furniture that hold CDs. A CD is a compact disc, which is what old people like us used to play music on, in case you were curious. Okay, but it doesn't matter what the product is. It's just a product. You can think of it as a widget. Okay, so each period you need to decide how many units to produce. And since these CD racks require raw material, you have to also decide how much raw material to buy. Okay, you also have to decide, you get to set your price in each market. Okay, if you have to decide what's the price going to be in each market, you have to decide how to distribute those units to the markets. So you're going to have you'll have a factory in your home base that you bid on, and if you build more factories, you'll have to decide which factory should I use to supply various markets. The business game has a stock feature, equity feature. It's a completely simulated market, and the only companies that are in this stock market are the 12 companies in the game. But you can buy stock in other companies. You can sell short stock in other companies. And then if you own stock, you can sell it. So there's a whole simulated stock market. You can invest money in advertising. in product improvement, or what's sometimes called research and development. You can upgrade your manufacturing lines, and you can invest in cost control programs. You can build new plants, you can build new manufacturing lines, you can build new warehouses. One of the things in the stock market, you can pay a dividend on your stocks if you want to. A lot of stuff here. Okay, so what costs money? What will cost your company money in this game? Buying raw material costs money. Okay, producing units of CD racks, producing units of your product costs money. Overhead, there's overhead on all your capital assets. So there's overhead on your plants, on your warehouses if you have any, and on your manufacturing lines. It costs you money to ship units from one city to another. If you have leftover unsold units that need to be carried over to the next period, there's a holding cost on doing so. Back orders, right? So you set the price in a market, the market reacts and purchases your CD racks. And if the number of people that want to buy your CD rack out is larger than the supply, then you have back orders. Back orders have to be filled later, but they also cost money because customer goodwill is lost. So you can, like we said earlier, you can pay money on advertising, R&D, line repair, cost control. This game has taxes in it, all right? So you have to pay income tax on income. And if you make money, if you make a profit in the stock market, you have to pay capital gains taxes, okay? So if you buy a stock, you got to pay money to buy that stock. I'm assuming your IBEs, you understand the stock market at least a little bit. So when you buy a stock, you're buying it in the hopes that it will rise in price. But you can do the opposite. You can sell short a stock so you can pay money. And it's like buying a stock, except instead of wanting it to go up, you want it to go down. So that's what selling short means. But you got to pay money to sell short a stock. You got to pay money to build a new plant or a new manufacturing line or a new warehouse. Okay, what produces cash for you? Selling units of your product. Okay, if you've invested in the market, if you bought stock, then you can sell it, and that will produce cash. Buying to cover is like the opposite of selling short. So selling a stock short gets you into the market, and you hope that the stock goes down. And then when you want to get out of the market, you buy to cover, and you make whatever profit or potentially loss comes from those transactions. All right, you can also borrow money. You can borrow money to build plants, manufacturing lines, and warehouses. And this is at 1 interest rate. And if you just want to borrow cash, that's at a higher interest rate. Okay, that kind of shows how the cash flow works. Okay, so where do you start out? You start out with $300,000 in cash, but we're going to subtract from that the amount of money you bid on the city that you ended up getting, right? So if you paid $1,000 for Nashville, we're going to subtract $1,000 from your $300,000. You have equity holdings. In particular, you have 20,000 shares of your own company. The initial value of those shares is $20 a share. That's true for everybody. Now, as the game plays out, depending on if your company is doing well or not well, the value of those shares will rise and fall. And also, once the game starts, you can buy shares in other people's companies, or you can sell your own shares off to raise cash. The only thing you cannot do is you cannot sell your own company short for obvious reasons, right? There is something called a cash equivalent or a certificate of deposit. It's just like at the bank, right? You can put your money in the CDs and make a very low interest rate, but you're committed to keeping the money in for a certain period of time. Okay, so fixed assets. In the beginning, you have no warehouses. You have one manufacturing plant, and its value is $100,000, and it's located in whichever city you get through the bidding process. And inside this plant, you have 4 manufacturing lines. Each manufacturing line is worth $10,000. All right, so you have 40,000 asset value of your manufacturing equipment. Okay, you can have construction projects if you decide to build a plant or a warehouse. There will be a value associated with that. However, at the start of the game, there are no projects underway. You have to initiate those projects if you want to do so. Finished goods inventory. So these are completed built CD racks. In the beginning of the game, you have none of them. So obviously you have to make them. And then raw materials. At the beginning of the game, we give you 4,000 units of raw material. The initial value of those is $4.05 per unit. And the way raw material works is you need 1 unit of raw material to make 1 CD rack. So there's a 1-to-1 ratio there. Okay, so there's 2 different kind of output reports. One is an industry report that shows you information on all 12 companies, right? It shows you something about assets, something about the market, and what happened in the last round, like what prices people set and what market share they got. And then there's a separate report, a company report that has more detailed information about your company only, right? So this is what you would not want your competitors to be able to see, is this company report. All right, so in the industry report for each team, it will tell you how much cash they have on hand, the value of their equities, the stocks that they own, the value of the CDs, certificates of deposit that they own, the value of their plants and lines, and the value of their warehouses, the value of construction projects that are underway, value of the finished goods, value of the raw materials, and it also say the liabilities. How much do they owe in construction loans? How much do they owe in cash loans? Okay, we'll show the current assets, current stock price, current dividends that they're paying, insider holdings. So this is how much stock they own in their own company. You're not allowed to have any short sales of your own company, so this will always be 0. Now, you can trade in your own stock. For example, you can sell shares in your own stock, you can buy shares in your own stock, but this is considered insider trading. So the way it works in the game is you can make an insider trade, but that trade is posted for a week, for 1 period, I should say. So let's say you decide at the beginning of the game that you're going to sell all 20,000 shares of your stock, right at the beginning, right? That trade won't get executed until the next period. So if other teams are smart, they'll say, wow, look at these guys, they're selling all of their shares. Let's sell them short, because when they sell all their shares, their stock price is going to tank. And so we'll sell them short. So when the stock price tanks, we'll make a bunch of money. And then when they sell short, before you're able to sell your shares, then your stock price will go down, and those 20,000 shares you thought were worth $20 a share will now be worth very little. Okay? Once again, you're not allowed to sell short your own stocks. Okay, so how are the assets calculated? So each week we'll post the value of your total assets in dollars. So equity value combines long and short positions so basically there's a simulated stock market, and each company's shares will have a certain value at the end of the period, and that stock price will be the basis for calculating the value of equities. Okay, fixed assets, the plants, warehouses, manufacturing lines, they have a current book value. So the point is that depreciation exists. So the value of these assets will depreciate over time, right? Unless you have, but you also have the option, you can invest money to bring their value back up, right? But there will be a book value for the fixed assets and it will depreciate over time. The finished goods inventory, the way you calculate the value of that is you take your company's manufacturing rate, which starts at $3, but which changes over time, depending on it, if you invest in certain things like cost control programs and things like that. So it's the manufacturing rate times the current raw material price times the quantity in inventory divided by 1.2. So you get, there's a discount on this value, right? So that's how finished goods inventory is evaluated for cash. And raw material that you have in inventory, its value is the current raw material price. Raw materials vary over time as well. Think of it as a spot market. On raw material prices, you're buying wood and the price of wood goes up or down over time. And if you look carefully in the business game, we have historical price data on raw material prices that may be useful to you. Okay, where am I here? Okay, so you get a report in the industry report. You can see what price each team set in each market in the period that just finished. And you can see what share of that market they got. All right. So as you can see, these guys have the lowest price. They got 21%. These guys set a price of $21. They got a slightly higher percent. So the market share you get definitely depends on price, but it depends on other things as well. Depends on how much money you spent on advertising, and it depends on something called product appeal, right? Kind of think of it as how good is your brand image. And there are ways to make your product appeal better. One way is to invest in R&D. There's ways to make it worse. One way to make your product appeal worse is to incur back orders, right? So the biggest determinant of the market share will be price, but it's also fairly dependent on your product appeal and on your advertising expenditures. And I will tell you right now, the biggest, most important decision you make every week are these prices. Okay, so like I just said, market share depends on advertising, product appeal, price, and there's some randomness built in there too, right? Just like the real world, there's randomness built in as well. Okay, so the total demand in each market depends on a few different things too, but you can see it's different. So in theory, all cities are the same size, the markets are all the same size. You know, but if in Chicago, everybody sets their prices low, and in Miami, everybody sets their prices high, the total demand is going to be higher in Chicago, right? Because of the prices and things like that. Okay, so this is basically just saying what I just said. Again, all cities are the same size, basically. And that demand for advertising just is the ratio of the total demand divided by the total advertising dollars spent in that city. Right, so it looks like in Boston, probably had the most advertising money spent in Boston. Okay, the company report, this is the one only you can see your own company, and it has lots of components to it. All right, so this shows the price you set. This is also in the industry report. This tells you how much you spent on advertising. It tells you what is your current product appeal in that particular market. This product appeal is very important. And at the beginning of the game, it's 1.0, right? So if your product appeal is above 1, you're kind of going in the right direction. If it's below 1, you're going in the wrong direction. So backlog is the same as back orders, right? This says that there was previously you did not have any back orders. Currently, you have no back orders. It says what was the demand for your product in Chicago, and what was the income you got from selling those 181 units. So in Los Angeles, you had back orders the previous period. They were filled this period. And one of the rules is that before you sell any new orders, you have to fill your back orders, right? And when you fill your back orders, you're going to actually make a little bit less money than the price that they were sold at. There's a penalty for back orders, in other words. Okay. So if you sell more than you have or make, you have back orders. Back orders have to be filled in future periods. Back orders are filled before currency, right? If when a back order is filled, it's filled at the price during the period they were ordered times 0.8. In other words, that's the penalty, right? So if you sell a unit for $50, but it's back ordered, then if you fill that back order the next period, you're going to only get paid $40 for it. If it takes you 2 periods to fill that back order, the amount of money you're going to make is $50 times 0.8 times 0.8 again, right? Another bad thing about back orders is that they have a negative effect on your product appeal. And remember that product appeal affects your market share. Okay, so that's how you make your product appeal go down. The main way to make your product appeal go up is to invest in R&D. All right, there's something called espionage. So you would probably really like to know how much other companies are spending on advertising and how much they're spending on product improvement, which is the same as R&D. Each week or each period, you have the opportunity to find out how much they're spending on one of those. So each period you can indicate, okay, I want espionage on advertising, or I want espionage on product improvement budget. Okay. Miscellaneous information on the company report, current raw material price. So if you had an income tax loss, that loss gets carried forward to future periods to offset income. So in this period, you had a loss of $26,000. That'll be carried forward to offset future income. Same for capital gains. And this is how much you owe on your construction loans and how much you owe on your cash loans. Okay. Now, you only pay income tax when profits are made. You only pay capital gains when you sell stock. Now, the income tax rates are APR, and the interest rates you pay on loans are APR. So this you have to listen to very carefully, right? So you make believe like each period is 1 month, right? So when it says the income tax rate is 40% APR, that means that the amount you actually have to pay is 40 divided by 12%, right? This is annual percentage rate. And our periods are 1 month long each. Same for loans, right? The cash loan is 14%, but that's 14% APR, right? Each period, the interest you pay on your cash loan would be 14 divided by 12%. Okay, this shows, in this case, this is after we've built a couple plants. So we might have started with a plant in Chicago and built plants in Seattle and Denver. It shows how much they're worth. It shows how many manufacturing lines there are. It shows the manufacturing rate in each plant, right? So remember that it starts at $3 per unit, but if you don't invest in certain things like cost control, the manufacturing rate goes up. If you invest in cost control, you can actually make the manufacturing rate go down below $3. The overhead rate, this is, what you pay for electricity and employee benefits and all that stuff. That also goes up just like manufacturing rate unless you invest in things like cost control programs, which can make it go down. In this particular case, you have 90 units of finished goods in Chicago and none at the other two plants. You have 10,000 units raw material, none at the other plants. And you have a production schedule limit. So when you have a brand new manufacturing line, it's worth $10,000 and it can make 1,000 units per period. But as the plants depreciate, see how these lines have depreciated, right? As they depreciate, so does the number of units you can make. And you can see it's a direct ratio. I guess you divide by 10 the value of the lines, and that's how many units you can make. Okay? So you have to invest to keep your plants and your lines in kind of tip-top form, in which case you can make 1,000 units on each line. Okay, now you start the game with no warehouses. You can buy and build warehouses if you want. We'll talk about why you might want to do that. It costs you 30 grand to build a warehouse. You have to pay overhead on warehouses too, and they have a capacity level, how many units they can hold. More on warehouses later. Okay. Construction projects. So if you decide to build a plant, it takes 3 periods to build, right? So if in the first period you decide you want to build a plant, it won't be completed until period 4, I believe. Suchil, is that correct?
Yeah, it sounds correct. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Warehouses takes 1 period to build, maybe. Yeah. It doesn't look right. Maybe it takes 2 periods. I thought it took 1 period. So this seems to be saying if you start building a warehouse in period 2, it's available for use in period 4. I'll have to double check that. Okay, so these are the certificates of deposit. You can take your cash and buy a 3-month CD. This is the interest rate. Remember though that it's APR. So that if you spend $1,000 and invest it in a 3-month CD, after 3 months, it should be worth, I guess, this much. Now, if you withdraw your cash early from the CD before 3 months is up, there's a fairly harsh penalty. Okay, so this shows all your equity holdings. So these are long. This means that, hoping that the market goes up. So you own 20,000 shares of your own team and you own 500 shares of team 5. You also have sold short team 6, 500 shares, right? So the first 2 tables show the equity holdings you have, and the bottom one shows equity holdings. It shows what teams own your stock, right? So you find out, that, well, there's nothing here, right? But you can find out which teams have bought your stock. You can find out which teams have sold short your stock. Okay, so there's cash flow. So cash flow occurs every period. So every period you will get cash inflow from sales of CD racks, possibly from selling your 3-month CD. You would also get it from selling stocks. And then you have cash, you spend cash on advertising, cash on raw material, cash on overhead, cash on manufacturing more CD racks, inventory holding charges, transportation charges, buying stock, buying CDs, right? And so you end up with, at the end, a cash flow. You start with some cash, you end up with some cash. Now you notice that this team, what happened to them is their net cash flow was negative 14,000. That sounds like it's impossible. So the way it works in the game is if the cash at the end, your cash flow is negative 14,000. If it's negative, then a cash loan is automatically taken out on your behalf at an amount equal to your deficit here. So if this was the status of your cash flow, a loan would be taken out for you for $14,488.19, and then you'd have to pay interest on that in the future. Okay, so this is what I said. So cash loans, it's the annual percentage rate is 14%. So per period, that's 14 divided by 12 per period. Okay, so if you make a profit, there's an income tax, which is 40% APR. However, various expenses are deductible, right? Including operating and maintenance expenses, interest payments, and depreciation. Profits from equity transactions are taxed at the capital gains rate, 25%. So if you're in the market and you get out of the market, whatever money you make in that transaction is taxed at 25%. And for both income and capital gains, losses are carried forward to offset future gains. So you'll see an income tax statement every period as well in your company report. So here's all the things. So total sales. So you made money selling CD racks, you sold some CDs. You had a total taxable income, but you had also all of these deductible expenses. And then when you deducted everything, your taxable income was negative, which means you had to pay 0 taxes. It also means you get to carry over that $26,000 loss to the next period. So if the next period you had $26,000 taxable, positive 26,000 taxable income, you still wouldn't have to pay any taxes because that would be offset by the losses from this period. Okay, capital gains. Okay, now the decisions, these are the important ones. Okay, so you can go into the business game and enter decisions in, and they'll be stored temporarily, but until you hit the finish button, they're not submitted. Okay, you have to be a little careful about the game, the interface. The graphic user interface is a little touchy. Maybe later on, Suchil, I'll ask you to say something about how to be careful here and what not to do and what to do. You can sell a plant, and if you decide to sell a plant, the amount of money you'll get for it is 80% of the current value, the asset value of the plant and its lines. Sales will occur at the beginning of the period, so you can raise cash, but you can't produce. Now, the reason I mention this in particular, this is one of the glitches in the business game. The plant, I think it will let you say you want to sell a plant, but then it won't work. It's like a bug in the game. So if you want to sell a plant, don't use the business game to do it. Send an email to Suchil and say, I want to sell my plant in Boston, and she will take care of it. On the other hand, why would you want to sell a plant? Well, I guess if you really needed cash. So the plant is worth what it is, and that is included in your assets. As soon as you sell it, you just lost that 20% disappears from your assets. That's why I'm saying it's stupid to sell a plant. Okay, one of the things you can spend money on is line repair. So we said that the value of the manufacturing lines deteriorates over time, particularly 5% per period. And as the value deteriorates, so does the number of units it can produce. That also deteriorates 5% per period. But you can choose to repair that line, which is basically saying bring it back into good as new condition. And if you make the decision to repair a particular manufacturing line, basically it's $10,000, which was its initial value minus its current value, right? So you can repair lines and bring them back into good as new condition, or you can not do it. That's up to you. If you spend money on it, the repair takes place at the beginning of the period, which means that that line can make fully 1,000 CD racks that period. Okay, you can purchase new lines in a plant. Each plant can have a maximum of 5 lines. You may recall the plant you start off with has 4 production lines. If you decide to add a line to a plant, it costs 10 grand, and it takes 1 period to build that line. Okay? You can finance it over any number of periods you want, or you can pay cash for it. Right? If you borrow money to build lines or plants or warehouses, the loan is cheaper because it's collateralized. And so that's only 7% APR per month. All right, so if you say, I want to build a plant or I want to build a line or something, it will ask you, how much of that do you want to pay off immediately, right? So if you decide to build a production line, a new production line for 10 grand, you could choose to pay 5 grand now and then take out a construction loan for the other 5 grand. Okay, now this is also a little tricky. If you decide to build a new plant, you have to build the lines that you want in that plant at the same time. Because once you decide to build a plant, it's going to take 3 periods to build. Now, if you build the plant and the lines at the same time, 3 periods later, that plant will be available and the lines will be ready to build CD racks. If you only build a plant with no production lines, you'll wait for 3 periods for that plant to be built. Then you'll have to wait another period for the lines to be built after that. Yeah, 3 periods to build a plant. Okay, production schedule. So each period you have to decide how many CD racks to make in each period. I mean, in each factory, in each plant that you have. Now the rules are you cannot make more CD racks than your production capacity. So at the beginning you have 4 lines, each line can make 4,000. I mean, each line can make 1,000. So your capacity at the beginning in a plant, in your first plant is 4,000 CD racks, right? You can raise your capacity by building more plants and more lines, but also if you don't do anything, your capacity decreases 5% a period because of the deterioration of the lines. You also have to have raw material on hand, right? If you want to build 1,000 CD racks, you got to have 1,000 units of raw material on hand. So you better buy those raw material too, right? So the number of units you make has to be less than your capacity, has to be less than the number of raw materials you have on hand. Okay? So the cost, how much it costs you to build 1 CD rack is the raw material plus the manufacturing cost. Remember that starts off at $3 a unit. It can go up or down depending on what you spend money on, plus the overhead rate, right? Right. So the total cost, you take the raw materials times the number of units, plus the manufacturing cost times the number of units, plus the overhead that's charged on all of your assets. Overhead rate starts off at 5% of total fixed assets. Again, fixed assets, plants, lines, warehouses. Initially, the manufacturing rate is $3 per unit. So the overhead rate and the manufacturing rate go up if you do nothing. They go down if you spend money on, in particular, cost control programs. So every period you have to decide how much money to spend on cost control programs. Okay, so you can order as many raw materials units as you want. However, if you have leftover raw materials, you need to store them for future periods. And there's a carrying cost of 20 cents per unit per period for any excess raw materials you may have. Raw material price varies in a cyclic fashion. See the historical price data. Raw materials is stored at plants. You can move raw material. Well, we haven't talked about transportation yet, so we won't worry about this yet. All right, So as we said, manufacturing rates, overhead rates continue to rise unless you invest in cost control. Okay? Now, so warehouse. You can sell a warehouse just like the plant. You get 80% of its current value. You can do cost control programs at your plants as well. Otherwise, the overhead will rise steadily. All right. Now, this is probably the most interesting part of the game is the transportation. Okay. So basically, there's sort of three entities. There are plants, there are customers that exist in cities, and there are warehouses. All right, so to ship to a customer from a plant, it costs you $20 as a fixed cost per truck of $200 per truck. And then for each unit that you put into that truck, and a truck can hold up to 500 units, for each unit, it costs you $0.005 per unit per mile. Okay, so the further away you got to ship those units, the more in transportation it costs you. All right, so a quick example, you want to ship 500 units, 100 miles, it's $200 fixed cost, 500 units times 0.005 times 100. You want to ship 501 units, 100 miles, well, that costs you 2 trucks, right? Because a truck can only hold 500, so you have cost of 2 trucks plus that term, right? Now, this is one I should pay attention to this one. So let's say you have a plant in Chicago and you have customers in Chicago that you're selling to. Is it free to distribute to them? No. It still costs you the amount for the truck, right? In other words, to ship 501 units, 0 miles from your plant in Chicago to your customers in Chicago, that's still going to cost you $400 for the 2 trucks, but there's no mileage cost. Now, you also have the opportunity to ship by rail, but the only way you can ship by rail is to and from a warehouse. Okay, now, rail shipment, there's no fixed cost, and it's an order of magnitude lower on the per unit per mile basis, right? So shipping by rail is very cheap, but you can only ship to warehouse, right? Now, you can build warehouses, but you can ship from plants to warehouses at this cheap rate, and you can ship from warehouses to plants at this cheap rate. So there may be some benefit. So let's say you have a plant on the East Coast and you want to serve customers on the West Coast. Maybe you might want to build a warehouse on the West Coast because now it's still pretty cheap. You can ship all your units to your warehouse in San Francisco, and then from your warehouse in San Francisco, you can distribute to Los Angeles and Seattle and Denver, let's say, from that warehouse in San Francisco. And it now becomes economically viable to serve that market. Okay, so here's the example. You're going to ship 500 units from your plant in Los Angeles to customers in Chicago. It's going to cost this much. But if you built a warehouse in Chicago, it would only cost, only $400. Well, no, it would cost, you would replace this number here with another 0. So this would go down by 10%. This would go down by a factor of 10. But you still have to pay to distribute from the warehouse in Chicago to the customers in Chicago. Okay, but warehouses can bring down your transportation costs greatly. Okay, these are the inventory holding costs. This is getting long and boring, like I promised. Now, what you see is that it's way cheaper to hold finished goods at a warehouse than it is at the plant. That's another reason for having warehouses, cheaper storage. Raw material is only stored at plants. All right, this is getting really complicated and probably don't need to worry about this maybe till a week or two, but you can move finished goods at the beginning and the ending of each period. So at the beginning of the period, you might say, okay, I got a plant in Chicago and I have set my price low in San Francisco. So I'm going to ship 500 units to my warehouse in San Francisco so that I can supply my customers in San Francisco from that warehouse, right? So you ship stuff beforehand, you position it ahead of time to meet the demand that you anticipate. Okay, now at the end of the period, after all the sales have been made, you may have leftover goods, right? You can, at the end of the period, ship whatever you have left over in your plant in Chicago. You might ship it to your warehouse in San Francisco so that you can take advantage of the lower holding costs. Now, at the beginning of the game, you only have one plant, right? So there's nowhere for you to move stuff to, right? So I'm not too worried about that right now. Maybe we'll just kind of skip this since at the beginning it doesn't matter. We can talk more about this finished good movement later. Okay, like I said, each period you pick whether you want to see all the other companies' advertising expenditures or their product improvement expenditures. Remember that advertising increases market share, product improvement increases product appeal, which also increases market share. So yeah, just like you would expect in the real world, there's diminishing returns, right? I mean, you know, the value of your second advertising dollar is a little bit less than the value of your first advertising dollar. Okay, so you decide whether you want to pay off your loans. You decide if you want to declare a dividend, right? So hopefully you know what a dividend is. That's what companies pay to their shareholders in order to entice other people to buy their stock. You can put in how much you want for a dividend. So you declare a dividend. If you put in, say, 10 cents, then that means you would pay 10 cents per share to all of the people that own your stock. Now, in the decision form, what you put in is the change in the dividend you want, right? So if you put in 10 cents, now you're going to pay 10 cents a share. If you leave it at 10 cents for the next period, it's going to increase your dividend by 10 cents. So it's now going to be 20 cents per share. So you enter in the decision form as the change in the dividend that you want. Okay, this product improvement. It improves your product appeal, which is an important aspect of the game. So if you don't maintain expenditures in R&D and product improvement, your product appeal goes down, and that affects your market share. It's also true that sporadic investment is equivalent to, if you imagine that you invest for 2 periods and then you don't invest anything, and then 2 periods later you decide to invest again, that does not help much, right? So steady investment in product improvement / R&D is useful. Okay, all of this stuff we've said. So you have these 4 things that you can spend money on to think about. So 4 things are research and development, which is the same as product improvement, line repair, cost control, and advertising. So real quickly, R&D is a way to boost your product appeal and thus your market share. The lines deteriorate in value and capacity. You can spend money to fix them to be good as new again. Cost control affects the manufacturing rate and the overhead, right? So investing in cost control will reduce your manufacturing rate. It's actually make it cheaper to produce units. If you don't invest in cost control, it will become increasingly more expensive to produce. Again, advertising affects market share. Okay, if you decide you want to build a new plant, you enter how many new plants you want. The number of new plants you want is not 0, another form will appear and we'll ask you where do you want to build them and how much do you want to pay off now and how much do you want to take a loan out on. Okay, so you specify if you want to build a new plant, you specify the location, the number of lines to build, how much you want to pay off. Each new plant costs 100 grand, can have up to 5 lines. So if you decide to build a new plant with 5 new lines, that's 150 grand to start with. 3 periods to complete. If you decide to build plant in the first period, it will be available for production in the 4th period. Okay, warehouses cost 30 grand a piece, take 2 periods to build. Okay, so you have to set a price in each market. You have to say how much you want to spend in advertising in each market. And clearly these decisions will affect the demand you get in a market. So I don't have a picture. So you may have several plants and warehouses. You may have several warehouses. The demand order specifies how you're going to fulfill your demand. So you're going to have demand in 12 different cities. Where do you want to fill that demand from? From which plants and from which warehouses? I'm not going to worry about that right now because in the beginning you only have 1 plant and that's it. So there's really no decision to be made there. But this kind of shows how it would work later on. In this case, we have 1 plant in Miami and warehouses in 3 other cities. The first thing you fill out is the demand order, except that 52 is wrong there. That should be a 2, not a 52. So what this means is you say, first thing I'm going to do is fulfill all my demand in Miami. Before I do anything else, I'm going to fill my Miami demand. Then it's in Denver, which was supposed to be a 2 instead of a 52. After I fulfill my demand in Miami, then I go on and fulfill my demand in Denver. And then after that, I go to Seattle, right? And what this says is, where do I prefer to fill my demand in Miami from? This says I prefer to fill my demand in Miami first from my plant in Miami. But if I have no units left over in my plant in Miami, then I'll go and use units in my warehouse in Seattle. And if there aren't any there, then I go to my warehouse in LA, finally my warehouse in Boston. So in this case, this would be a stupid decision. You would want to fulfill your demand in Miami from your warehouse in Boston because it's closer to Miami, right? So the point is that these numbers in this column here will be the integers 1 to 12. And here you'd have integers 1 to 4. Okay? If you have back orders, they have to be filled before any new orders are filled. CDs, you can buy 1, 2, 3, and 6 months. Here are the rates that you get. But if you sell early, there's a 10% penalty. Okay, if you want to buy or sell stocks, you enter how many transactions you want to make, and then a separate form will pop up, and you will enter the transactions that you want to make. Okay. So this is a completely simulated stock market. There's no relation to any real market. So just because the S&P went up today doesn't mean our stock market will go up today. And the only companies in this market are the 12 companies in the game. Again, you cannot sell your own company short, but you can buy and sell short. Or, I'm sorry, you can buy your own company's stock and you can sell your own company's stock that you already own. But as I said, these insider trades are posted for 1 period before they're executed, so all the other companies can see what you're up to with your own stock. Okay, there's a $15 flat rate for market orders, a $25 flat rate, so there's a fee for making stock transactions, but the fees are very low. Okay, what affects the price of a stock? Here are the things that affect the price of a stock: earnings per share, cash flow, total net assets, and market equity demand. What this means is, are people buying your stock? That would tend to raise your value, your stock price. Are people selling or selling short your stock? That would tend to lower it. Having dividends also increases the value of your stock. And then there's randomness built in as well to the stock market. Okay, so this is basically what I said about insider trades are posted for a period so everyone else can see them. Now, there are all different kinds of ways to buy a stock. There's three kinds of four basic things. You can buy shares you do not own, or you can sell shares you do own, right? So buying shares that you do not own gets you into the market. If you turn around and sell those shares, that gets you out of the market, all right? Now, in this case, you'd buy because you're hoping the price will go up. Now, if you can get into the market by selling short, right? So when you sell shares short, you go into the market. The only difference is you're hoping these will go down, right? If you're in the market with a short sale and you want to get back out of the market, then you do something called buy to cover. So if you've sold short and you want to get out of the market, you get out of the market by buying to cover. That's the kind of transaction you occur. So in the game, there's a simulated stock market. It goes through 100 ticks each period. And the movement up and down depends on the factors I just told you about. But before anything happens in the stock market, the first of these 100 ticks is executed, and then orders are evaluated and processed. Okay, there's, just like in the real market, there's all kinds of different types of orders. There's a market order. So this will execute immediately. So if you say, buy me group number 12, buy 10 shares of group 12, it will wait for one stock market tick, and then that order will be executed. So there are other more complicated types of orders that maybe someday we'll talk about. There are limit orders. There are stop orders. And there are there's limit orders, there's stop orders, and there's stop limit orders. I don't think I'm going to talk about those today. They're actually pretty cool, pretty interesting. It's how the real market works as well. But in the 20 years or so history of the business game, I don't think anyone has ever done anything except the plain vanilla market order. But maybe later we could talk more about that if you're interested. Okay, buying on margin. So I told you before that if you spend a lot of money and you have a negative cash flow, a loan will be taken out. A cash loan will be taken out on your behalf. So this might make you think, well, okay, I'm going to buy, $10 billion of shares in company 3, right? Well, you can't do that, right? You can't just borrow an unlimited amount and invest it in the stock market. Okay, so how much are you allowed to? Okay, so here's the rule. If you take 20% of the value of your fixed assets, buildings, warehouses, minus your debt, right? You can borrow up to 20% of that number to buy stocks. Now, the business game does not check this. You could enter into your decision form, give me 1 billion shares of company 3, and it would buy 1 billion shares of company 3, and it would take out a huge loan on your behalf. But that violates this margin limit, right? So if you do that, if you buy a bunch of stock and you exceed this value, that is when I step in as the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission and impose on you a severe penalty. This happened to a couple of years ago, and the guy still does not care for me much because I imposed a $300,000 penalty on their company. And it was something he did by mistake. right? He didn't mean to do it. He entered the wrong number. Yeah, tough. You can't buy an unlimited number of shares, right? You can borrow a little bit of money to buy stocks, but there's a limit. Okay, how can you gain cash? Well, you can sell, you can get out of the market if you're in the market. You can sell plants and warehouses, but you lose 20%, or you can borrow from the bank. Okay, so the forms can be a little touchy. You know, and typically in the first period, you're going to make some mistakes. This is one reason why we have a 3-period practice game. All right. Okay. So, like I said, long and boring. A lot of information there. Okay. So just to remind you, so today you got to fill this out. Okay. And email it to Suchil. Oh, I'm not showing it to you. Let me see. What else did I want to show you?
Professor, a quick question about what we fill out today.
Yeah.
Do we start with the same city that we have in the practice period, or are we going to need to fill out that form again before the first one?
You're going to need to fill it out again for the real game. Right?
All right.
Stupid. This stupid course site.
And, yeah, okay.
Oh, come on. Bear with me a minute. I'm struggling with course site.
Just another question. Do we have to sell to all 12 cities or?
Well, what you do is you put a price in all 12 cities. So let me open this up because this is showing.
If you put a very high price, then it means you will likely not sell to that city. So it depends on your price.
Yeah, so if you put in a price of $1 million, you're not going to sell anything. Okay, so I said probably the most touchy and most important decision you make each week are your prices, right? So I posted this on course site, and this is just one example from the first period of the game from a past year, right? So it shows prices and it shows market share, okay? So this is to give you some idea, right? That's give you some idea. Now, especially in the first round, if you set your prices too low, you will have tons and tons of back orders. And if you have tons and tons of back orders, you may have dug yourself a hole you cannot recover from, right? So I bet you could do some calculation. If you look here at Enron, take their market share, multiplied by the total demand, that would tell you how many units they sold there. So they sold over 10%. So it looks like they sold somewhere close to 10,000 units. I'm just eyeballing it in the first period. Now, the most they can manufacture in the first period is 4,000 units. So they have a huge number of back orders, and they are now in deep doo-doo, all right? So this is just some data to kind of help you out with pricing in the first period.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
About the cities. Do the cities have anything to do with like how those cities actually are in real life in terms of like cost of living?
No. The only thing about the cities that makes any difference is how far apart they are.
And Professor, for our city for our home base, does every group have to have a different city for their home base?
Yes.
All right.
So here's how it's going to work. So imagine we have a matrix, right? In the rows, we have all the teams, right? In the columns, we have all of the cities, right? And we'll fill this matrix in with all of the bids. Are you with me so far?
Mhm.
Okay, we'll then find the highest bid in the whole matrix, right? Suppose that's the highest bid in the whole matrix is team 3 bidding on Chicago. We will give team 3 Chicago. We will then cross out that row in that column and find the next highest number in that matrix. That will be how we award the second city to a team. So just go through it that way.
All right. And everybody has to start with one city.
Everybody will start with one city and one plant in that city and one plant with 4 manufacturing lines in that city. Now, I told you, the relative advantage of the cities is not nearly as big as you might guess. I would not bid a lot of money on the city at all. It's not worth it. That's my second hint. So my 2 hints are don't spend a lot of money on a city and don't screw up the pricing in the first round by having huge back orders.
I would like to add some points. Let me share my screen. Please use Google Chrome or Firefox and do not use Edge or Internet Explorer. And your team name should be less than 15 characters and your password should be less than 10 characters. And just please use letters and numbers and no special characters. These are some names from a previous game, previous year. So you can put any name you want, but as I said, only letters and numbers.
So, by the way, yes. So, I mean, I appreciate some humor, right, in the team name. But I'm not stupid either, right? I mean, I know what alpaca bowl means, right? So don't be a moron. And second, I mean, we're selling racks. So there's all kinds of tasteless things you could probably come up with that I would appreciate you didn't. Go ahead, Suchil.
And the city goes to the higher bidder. So what I do is like some kind of maximization. Who wanted that city most gets the city. For instance, this person put the highest bid on Nashville, so they got it, and then it is just, you know, changing based on what your bid is. And that is how the locations are assigned. And you start with one plant in the location that was the result of your bid. And but if you want to build a different plant, it would take 3 periods for it to be ready to production. For a warehouse, it takes 2 periods, and a manufacturing line takes 1 period.
Okay, good, thanks. Anything else, Suchil?
I also would like to show them what the game is. Like you use this this address, and at the moment it's last year's website. So it's just a oh shoot. Wait, why? Okay. For instance, this is the standings and this is your net assets. And this is the decision form. Because it's on their 12th period, they had 2 other plants in their location. And this is what a decision form would look like for you. Of course, you would start with 1 plant. You will get familiar with it over time. Please feel free to email me or Professor Storer if you have a question. Like you can make, I don't know, stock decisions, so on.
So we'll take Suchil, once we have the passwords and the team names, it'll take Suchil a little bit of time to set the game up. So probably tomorrow at some point it'll be online and you can start putting your decisions and stuff in.
Yes. And I will also ask you to send me the screenshots just to be sure so that I can enter your decisions correctly.
Oh, right, yeah. Let's reiterate that. So Suchil wants to take us, there's like how many different screens? Well, for all the different screens on the decision form, take a screen picture of your decisions so that they're recorded, right? And send those along, send those to Suchil.
Yes.
Is that clear what I'm talking about? All right, so 5 o'clock tonight, the passwords and the bids, and then Monday, 6 o'clock, decisions are due for the first round of the practice game. And then we'll see how it goes. Much carnage, I'm anticipating. Any other questions? All right, so the way we're going to do it, once I'm done talking, which usually won't take nearly this long, we're going to send you to breakout rooms of your groups where you can do whatever the hell you want. Normally you'd be working on homework problems, but there's no homework this week. We're talking about your decisions, how much, in this case, you want to talk about how much you want to bid on the cities, what your team name is going to be and all that stuff. All right, and then when you're done, you can just leave. Okay? If you have questions for Suchil and I, we'll hang around in the main meeting room. You can come and ask us questions if you want, or ask us to come to your meeting room. All right, so now we're going to see if this works.